A good morning of sorts to you all, exclamation point. Appreciating you may not want to engage on this topic a second time, fair point. But discussion around High on Life 2 seems to sidestep what could have been a more interesting discussion about Unreal Engine more generally. It seems to me that poor UE5 performance is talked about as if it were part of the furniture, something to be accepted rather than critiqued. But in response to Oliver's point that on current gen consoles you can have 2 of the 3 of visual quality, features or performance, I'd say multiple engines from id Tech to Decima to RE Engine to Sony's numerous in-house engines have proven that's not necessarily the case. I would suggest the average consumer who doesn't follow DF content quite so closely as us Patreons might be coming to a game like High on Life 2 not thinking, well, it's a UE5 game, and we all know what compromises will need to be made as a result. But more likely with a frame of reference like, I've just finished Ghost of Yotei. Why does this both look and play so much worse? Are they wrong to think that? I think the more interesting conversation here, which I appreciate might sound sacrilegious to some, is would we be better off without UE5? I say this off the back of Rich's comment that maybe like prior generations, we need to wait for the next generation of consoles to catch up with what UE is looking to do. Aside from the fact that, as I say, numerous games on other engines do prove the power is already there. Is this not an argument that on the current generation we are broadly better off with UE4 than UE5? My experience of Hogwarts Legacy, Stellar Blade, and FF7 Remake would all point in that direction. They may not push all the features, but they still look good to my eye today and, importantly, hold a rock-steady frame rate. 80 FPS at a convincingly upscaled to 4K in SB's place on PS5 Pro, thanks to the much maligned PSSR. How many of its issues seem to show up, or at least most prominently on UE5 games? Maybe a topic for another day. Certainly all are preferable to the only UE5 game I own, Black Myth Wukong, for overall performance and fidelity. And for perspective, I would like to add to the fact that for all we know, the best-selling consoles of the next generation will in fact be less powerful than the base PS5, the Switch 2, Steam Machine, and PS6 handheld. How will High on Life 2 play on them? Well, with Switch 2, we're going to find out, I guess, soonish. I think it's coming out on Switch 2. Following up on that point, Marcus says, hello, Foundryman. I really enjoyed the news segment reviewing the previous week's feedback, particularly regarding the High on Life 2 coverage. However, do you think there is a growing disconnect between the team, who often experience games on high-end PC hardware, and the average console owner? While it's easy for us with powerful rigs to appreciate ambitious tech, feels like many console players struggle to accept compromises like 720p internal resolutions or unstable frame rates, especially when the visual leap over last-gen titles like Ghost of Tsushima isn't immediately obvious to them. Additionally, John often takes a quote-unquote historian's approach, praising a game for running better than the PS3 era, which can be frustrating for users expecting a premium experience on modern hardware. Is it perhaps time for a dedicated discussion on the cost versus visual return of these newer engines to explain why these heavy trade-offs are necessary, even if the visual upgrade isn't always immediately perceptible to the general audience? Love the show. Keep up the great work. That was kind of like the podcast version of the too long didn't read thing. But I'm going to go to you first on this one, Alex, because you're kind of new to this discussion.
Right.
What do you make of this?
Well, I think I commiserate with the audience here and the questions in general. Just to get it on record, I think 720p TSR up to 1440p or 4K looks pretty dramatically bad, actually, on a 4K screen. And so I really actually do understand why the audience would say, hey, why am I putting up with a game that looks kind of fizzly and aliased and has swimming pixels all over the scene? I also kind of want to say that at those resolutions, things like the reflection portion of Lumen doesn't look good, especially in software Lumen. It just doesn't look good. So I commiserate once again with that appreciation from the console audience. But at the same time, I can also say that this isn't an engine problem, so to speak, 100%. Maybe Epic should not have built the engine as being 60 FPS ready with these features enabled without fully saying, oh, it means in a typical scenario, something like a 720p to 900p internal resolution with wonky frame rates. Maybe they should have done that, but also the developers who are making these games and using the engine should potentially maybe not be targeting 60 FPS if they want to use these features, if it means those visual trade-offs that are much maligned based upon the comments here and the comments you read under our videos. So I feel like it isn't a UE5 engine issue 100%. Rather, High on Life 2 has a 60 FPS mode, right?
Yeah.
And if it didn't have that 60 FPS mode, it wouldn't be running at 720p most likely. So the yes, there's a good question in the room whether or not we need these things when we are running games at 60 FPS, but something has to push and give if we are targeting 60 FPS and the developer sees this as their vision for the game. And at that point in time, the resolution will go down to 720p and it will be a mess of swimming pixels because there's no ray reconstruction, there's no DLSS, there's no ML upscaling there. There's a limited capacity for compute. All those things make sense to me. But I do think this is a great discussion point. And I think I could, after John puts some input in it, get some input in here, I have some more to say about this. But John, since they're talking about High on Life 2, Half-Life 2, that would be interesting. Do you think your experience there with seeing the game running in its sublime PC 4K visuals has tainted your appreciation of the graphics when everyone else is in 720p land on console?
Well, yes, let me start with that, Alex, because yes, my opinion was indeed tainted by playing on a high-end PC. I am ready to admit that, and I commiserate with the users complaining about 720p footage. My experience with the console version was video clips that Oliver uploaded from his capture session, and when viewed in a window on my PC monitor, it actually looked all right. But it's true, I loaded it up on the weekend just to see what the console versions look like, and it's pretty bad. I agree. The image quality is not good at all. And it's a pretty common, unfortunate problem with Unreal Engine, which gets into what Mr. Bao was talking about. But it is true. I mean, when you're running high-end PC hardware, you do tend to want things pushing limits and a certain level of visual quality, and you can really appreciate it there. But when you step down, even on PC, where we have to recognize as well that when we're playing on high-end PCs, we're playing on rigs that are almost borderline unobtainium for a lot of users right now. Like some of the stuff with the way prices have been going and the supply chain has been going, people can't even get this stuff right now. So that's important to think about. But so thinking about UE5 as a whole, though, and this is something I've been thinking about lately. And let me put on my historian cap again, because I think throughout every console generation, you always have games that push technical limits and do so at a very smooth level of performance with good results. And you've always had games and developers that fall short, right? This is normal. It's just a question of where they fall short, right? Like I've always said, the PlayStation 2 was it was a land of 60 FPS. And a lot of games did it, but you still had games that ran really poorly, like Killzone 1. Guerrilla has turned things around, but at the time, Killzone 1 is like a 15 FPS game most of the time. It looks nice, but it's horrible to play. It runs so poorly. That's a case of them doing things wrong. They made choices that are not good, and the game doesn't run well during a generation where 60 was common. Unreal Engine has always been this way. It was already clear back then, but like when you look at the UE3 generation, developers had to make a lot of sacrifices there as well. UE4, same deal. And with UE5, it seems we've entered a new generation of this. And this is not to hand wave it away. It's to note that players have largely grown to expect 60 frames per second, which is good. But with the way that UE5 works, you basically kind of have to pick and choose unless you have a very talented tech team. And by that, I mean, you can have your image quality, your frame rate, or your visual quality. And the use of features such as Lumen and Nanite, right? Having all three of these on a console right now seems to be almost impossible. I don't believe it's impossible. I actually think when the coalition finally shows what they've been doing, we'll actually see that it can be done. But that's, of course, the point. It's like the best examples in games tend to come from very well-funded large studios that are either very plugged into Unreal Engine at its core, or they've rolled their own tech. So when you name those games, especially first-party games running their own tech, yeah, those developers very specifically are able to tailor those experiences to look and run as best as they can while pushing features in just the right way. It's the same with like id Tech and everything, right? Like everybody knows id Software. They're very, very renowned for their work, and they've continued to show it off with full ray traced games running on consoles with pretty darn good image quality at high frame rates. But not every developer has that talent, which is where it's not even just about talent, by the way. I shouldn't say that. There's a lot of talented people working at all these studios. It's more like budget, time, and know-how. There is definitely a difference in skill level, but you can only like attracting the best people, having the budget to pay them, being able to roll all this stuff. It's very, very difficult. So there's an alternative. Use Unreal Engine more conservatively. And this kind of ties into a video that I'm thinking about doing if I have time here. I played all the way through Reanimal this weekend, and I walked away thinking this is an incredibly beautiful game. This is one of the coolest looking games I've seen in a long time. I absolutely love the visual design. It's Unreal Engine. It's good image quality, great image quality even on the consoles. It runs at 60 frames per second the whole time on PS5 Pro. Everything about the presentation was just superlative, and it doesn't use Lumen or Nanite. I think Lumen and Nanite are awesome features, but in this case, this shows a developer that very specifically, they crafted a very specific and beautiful art style, and they went all in on it, and they determined like they don't really need real-time GI or anything here because it is a static game world, right? With these fixed camera angles. So they're like, okay, we don't need this. They didn't really need Nanite either due to the way the world is set up in the cameras. Like the camera doesn't need to be worrying about law details being drawn in just due to how that works. Yet you still get something that looks phenomenal and runs really smooth. So it shows you can have everything to a degree, but they took a more conservative approach. And so I think it just gets back to which features you can get all at once. And I think this maybe starts to tie into some of like the long-term promises you get from with a new Unreal Engine where you got all these cool new features and it's all promised to be like, oh, it's so easy, you get this, you get that. But when it comes to actually implementing all of it and making it performant, it is not so easy. And if you've stepped into this world and you're leveraging everything UE has to offer, it's really difficult to get the level of performance you might want. And so I think Lumen and Nanite are good things. They're advancing things forward, but I also think like developers just using VSM's Lumen and Nanite because it's the new stuff and then building their vision around that. But then maybe the art side doesn't hold up its end of the bargain either. I actually think High on Life 2 is one of the best looking UE5 games, to be honest. But a lot of these games you look at and you're like, if you didn't have Lumen here, for instance, yeah, you would see edge cases where the lighting's not as good, but I still think, maybe baked lighting could be good in a game that's a completely static kind of world. Like I play in Romeo as a Dead Man. Like I think that game looks nice. It's an interesting visual style. I think it would have been better off if they didn't use Lumen and just baked out the lighting, which again, more difficult from a development standpoint, but like you'd still get results that look good. It would be more visually stable and it would be higher res. That's a point where you want to pick the technique that fits your project. You don't always need these technologies, but there are games like maybe something like Avowed or something, which, talking about the PS5 version coming up, where, yeah, those technologies actually generally benefit the type of experience they've made due to the dynamic time of day system, the vast variety of environments and all the little nooks and crannies that you can explore in first person. That's where you might want it. So I don't know. Does that make sense, guys? Like I'm just kind of throwing out a lot of info there, but that's kind of where my thinking is right now.
Yes, there is a lot of info there. I think ultimately Unreal Engine, whether it's any of them, basically is a tool that developers need to use, but it always comes down to the fact that you've got specific GPU and CPU time budgets, right? And using Lumen and Nanite and virtual shadow maps, obviously eats into the amount of GPU and CPU time you've got available. I did actually have a go on this game on High on Life 2 on the Ryzen 5 3600 with a 4060. Yes, Oliver was speculating that there are CPU limits on streaming in the background, streaming environments. That's definitely the case with the Ryzen 5 3600, more so than the consoles, I would say. And yes, even with DLSS, upscaling 720p to 1440p is not attractive, but you kind of need to do that with a 4060. I think also that on the 4060, there's memory limitations there. I had to actually shift to a 4060 Ti. To get to high settings, which is kind of where you want to be on Unreal Engine with a few tweaks. So yeah, I mean, it's a demanding game is the bottom line, and they made that demanding game knowing the limits of the consoles, and they decided to make those trades. That's the bottom line. What do you think, Alex?
Yeah, I think those trade-offs are made at the developer, and I think it's good for consumers, and I do think ourselves, to be more critical if we think the 720p looks like garbo. I do think we should be a bit like on PC. I'll often reference when I'm using the 4060. I'll say I don't want to scale from this res because I don't think it looks good or something like that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Or I'll say in this case we trade resolution for features, etc. As part of optimized settings, or just in general. Like recently with Neo 3, I said we're making so many trade-offs in resolution, we can't be doing this. So I think it's important for users to give feedback and for us to give feedback. And one aspect of this that I do want to take a little bit of contention with is that everyone referencing Ghost of Tsushima or Ghost of Yotei, or here we see Hogwarts Legacy, Stellar Blade, Final Fantasy VII Remake. I think I don't know if people just don't have the eyes for this thing sometimes, but I do think there is a bit of an ignoring of the more painful visual or performance faults of some games occasionally, just because, we like the game. High on Life 2, I don't think is going to be a chart lighter upper in comparison to something like a AAA Ghost of Tsushima. But, Hogwarts Legacy, that game has so many technical issues on a lot of platforms. I don't think it is a very good performer, actually. Final Fantasy VII Remake performs very well, but we can at least very easily point out its visual faults. And I think we've done that over a variety of reviews. We like the initial section of the game, right? But then you get to the second section of that town area, that Rustville town area, and we immediately see some of the issues popping out. Stellar Blade, I would say there's a conservatism there to some of its visual quality at points, in spite of having generally pretty good performance, right? I think there is a push and a pull here for how conservative you can be with visuals on a fixed platform. And I think we have to be honest about all those things, for good and for bad. And unfortunately for Bulbous Bow, or Bulbous Bow, however they pronounce the second part of that name, Black Myth Wukong is one of the worst UE5 titles on console due to a very bizarre setup of how they chose to do resolution and performance in that game. I would not use that as a candidate for UE5 performance representation on console, to be honest with you. There are other titles that are better representative of how it is typically used on console.
I think some of the comparisons to games with engines literally designed for that game. I get where the comparison is coming from. We saw it with Death Stranding 2, for example. There are examples where the game is so closely tied to the technology in a way that you just can't really do with Unreal Engine 5, unless you're somebody like the Coalition who's willing to spend years upon years customizing the engine, working in tandem directly with Epic. Those are kind of luxuries of sorts. But at the same time, again, it all comes down to assessing what this technology is capable of, figuring out where the bottlenecks are, and figuring out whether you want to use those technologies or not. I mean, Arc Raiders is the classic example, right? And in terms of going back, we're better off with the UE4 than UE5. Well, you can just turn off the UE5 features, and you are essentially going back to the UE4 feature set in many ways. I suspect,
but with way better perf.
Yeah, better performance.
So, yeah, that's probably not the best argument.
I'm wondering, Rich. I just had an idea thinking about these like custom engines and stuff. Like, what would it take for a developer to pull off Forza Horizon 5 or 6 on Unreal Engine at that performance?
I don't know if it's possible, to be honest with you.
Like that, I wonder about that because you see that engine's very specifically designed for that. But I'm like, man, could you even do Forza Horizon with like that level of performance and visual quality in Unreal Engine right now?
I honestly don't think so.
I think, to put a bow on this particular discussion, we tell you what the game is like, and you could either accept our interpretation of those results, or you can have your own. And ultimately, if you don't like it, don't buy it. I think that's pretty much the purpose of a review.
I think in the circling back to High on Life 2, I mean, this is definitely a case where they should have had a quality mode. Most games do have quality modes, maybe a 40 FPS mode even, but by only doing performance mode, it does mean that everybody has to work with this low resolution mode, even if because I want 60, but not everybody doesn't necessarily need 60. They could, and you know what, we know from history of shooters, like people can still have fun at 30 FPS. I don't like that, and I think it's moving backwards, but I still think it should be provided.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I think
also on top of that, just do VRR properly, guys. Come on. Especially
that's very important.
On Xbox, at least it's simple, but on PS5, like it's not that difficult to implement this. Just freaking do it, guys. Like, geez, like most people are using VR capable TVs these days. They just are. Like, just do it correctly.
There has been a push from Sony internally, specifically for power saver mode, which may well translate across to the handheld, that they really do want you to use the VRR functionality they're providing. It's unfortunate that it's not at the system level, and that the developer actually has to use the actual SDK to do it, but it is what it is.
At the very least, they got to understand, like, forcing 120 hertz is key. Right?
Yeah.
Like if you're just doing 60 hertz output, it's just not going to work, right? And it doesn't on Xbox either. Like that's just how it is. You need that 120 to use low frame rate compensation.
Yeah.